Hi, everyone. Happy Star Wars Day. I was thinking a lot this week about how much all the free content I receive on Twitter and through podcasts means to me. And I just wanted to think of some way to say thank you to all of you who spend so much of your time giving me such joy. What I don't often talk about on Twitter is I'm an academic. I earned my PhD a number of years ago, and I've taught literature at a few universities here in Boston. And I've been thinking a lot about as I consume your content how great it is, what I could contribute from my skill set. And one thing that kind of came up to in my mind is just that I think a lot of you apply Campbell really well and are thinking about these deeper mythological theories that he offers us to look at Star Wars. And that's some of my favorite parts of Star Wars. But I did realize that there are a lot of parts of Campbell that people overlook. And so when you're thinking about how you apply Campbell, there's often stages in the hero's journey or resonances of the hero's journey that don't quite work out. And so because I'm distance learning right now with my students distance teaching, I have it all set up here with a blackboard in my house to teach. And I thought maybe as a thank you gift to all of you who create such good content, I would just put together a little lecture to think about some of those themes and to share some of those things I think we overlook. So because it's Star Wars Twitter, I just want to emphasize, this isn't me correcting you. This isn't me saying you're dumb or anything like that. This is me trying to, explain some parts of Campbell and add in some thoughts that I think people overlook a lot. So I've titled this kind of lecture, Campbell, Harmon, and Rey. So what I want to do is walk you through Campbell. I'm going to then move into Dan Harmon, who gives us a really helpful kind of distillation of Campbell's themes and ideas. And then I'm going to apply that real quickly to Rey, just as kind of we just got through Rise of Skywalker, and we've been thinking a lot about her journey and what it means as a part of that. So I'm going to pop up back to the blackboard, and what I'll do is I'll fill in this board a bit as we go, and then I'll tweet a picture of the final board as well, in case that's helpful. Great. So, where I really want to begin is I want to think a little bit more about Campbell and why he's so powerful. I think we all remember that George specifically said, Campbell was the theory I used. I wanted to build a modern myth, and that's where I turned. And it's really important to think about Campbell and his genius in that way, right? But the other thing about Campbell we have to remember is he's writing his primary works in the 1940s. And so when we think about his book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, we should absolutely celebrate its genius. It's a founding text in structuralism, an important school of criticism. But we have to remember that reading that book, you recognize that he is also a product of his times. So a lot of people have said when we look at modern heroes, especially female heroes, we should try to move beyond Campbell. I'm just going to talk about Campbell today and a little bit more from Harmon. But I do want to just completely validate the point of view that we should be looking at, writers of color and female writers who have tried to recast this and done a little bit more work on this. Particularly, Campbell has some white-centric views on native tribes, and though he treats their art respectfully, he's not always the best about their language. So looking at natives writers who have given voice to their own people is just as important. Okay, but that's the point. Campbell has survived, right? All of these years later, all these decades later, we're still talking about Campbell and we're still thinking a lot about it. So I went ahead and I reproduced as best I could is the basic circle for Campbell's hero cycle. And I think, all of us who love Star Wars and love Campbell, we view it as that, a cycle. And what better demonstration of that than the fact we have 3 trilogies that each go around the cycle. Sometimes individual movies go around the cycle. And now we have a saga that goes around the cycle as a part of that. My favorite way to understand Campbell, and this is based a lot in his book, Hero of a Thousand Faces, which is a hard read, but it's a good read if you can get through it. I like to think about Campbell by dividing his circle into 4 quadrants. And I think a lot of people who receive this content in high school, you probably think about it a little bit that way. And so when the hero takes their journey around through these quadrants, I think we are familiar with the steps and the stages that go into them, right? I'll just give one name to all of these. This first one I'm going to call the Call to Adventure. This is the part of the story where we meet the hero, we understand that they have a want, that they want to improve their world, and then they get that opportunity, and they deny it, and then they eventually go on to that. After they cross over the transition point, they move from their call to adventure phase to what I'll just use the Campbell term for is the road of trials. And when we think about the road of trials, this is where the hero goes on a lot of different adventures where over and over again they learn something, they gain knowledge of who they are, and they gain companions and tools and magic spells, whatever stage, whatever type of journey that is. Then down at the bottom, they have another key moment where they cross over from gaining their skills to this real kind of confrontation with whatever evil, whatever darkness exists in their world. And so I'll call this stage apotheosis. Apotheosis is where they have now confronted the evil in their world, and they fail at first, and then they are eventually successful, and they overcome that evil, and they are able to, rid the world of that evil, or so they think. And then the last quadrant is called, I'll call nostos, which is the Greek word that just means return, because an important part of every hero's journey is the return home, and the events that happen there after they get there. This phase, in modern myths, if you're thinking of a lot of movies, we often leave out the Nostos piece of that story. The best example of that is actually Lord of the Rings, where if you read the books and if you love the books, Return of the King ends with this big conflict where Saruman has come to the Shire and taken it over under the guise of Sharky is his name in that. And that just gets wiped out in the movie. I mean, people complain that movie has a lot of endings, but there should be another half hour of that battle. And so we left that out. If you're looking for the best example of a good Nostos, for me, you can't beat The Incredibles, right? At the end of the big battle, they defeat the droid, they get back to their house, and lo and behold, Syndrome has arrived and tricked the babysitter and has this little minor confrontation with Jack Jack. The return is all about going back to the life you have, having changed, and then you get to this status of being the master of both worlds, right? That you're able to be both a hero of the outer world and also of your home, and you're able to give those gifts back. And then you immediately get back to the top, and you start that cycle over. All right, so all of that is probably what you knew about Campbell already. You probably even can fill in more of this circle as you go to. I want to point to one thing people often overlook, and that is to think about these 4 key moments. These are the moments that Campbell really determines are the critical parts of the hero journey, and they resonate so much with us because we are going through these parts of our journey as well in our lives. Campbell's reasoning for myth and for all the stories that help us understand the world around us is that we need myth to get through the transitions in our own lives, to learn how to advance ourselves and to improve ourselves as a part of this. So those 4 moments are really key, and if you're trying to analyze any story, Star Wars or otherwise, I think you should think mostly about those 4 key moments, right? So this one on this side is, of course, birth. And to think about what it means to enter into a world, what it means to kind of start in that neutral state. The key over here is entering the world, right? In Campbell terms, that's crossing the threshold. And this is a key moment in all societies. Campbell is the first to figure out all the myths around the world tend to follow this cycle. And in this point, he's trying to say, well, why is that? Well, when we think about crossing the threshold in our own lives, this is a key moment in the lives of many cultures, right? Here in America, we think about Sweet 16 parties, right? That this is this big thing. People of the Jewish faith think of a bar or bat mitzvah. And around the world, we see that there's, trials at this moment. Native tribes traditionally have kind of coming-of-age trials that somebody has to go through. Well, this key moment is a really difficult part in our lives. Now, I'm lucky enough to teach college, and I will say that the majority of students I encounter are at that crossing the threshold moment because they've been in the shelter of their own home lives. This is, broad strokes. I know there are a lot of different stories, but they've been sheltered in their own lives, and here they are crossing that threshold, figuring out who they want to be and how they're going to act in the world on their own. Now, This is a very idealistic moment, I think, naturally, of Luke staring off into the suns, Rey watching that spaceship take off as she's eating her dinner. And the crossing of the threshold is that moment where the hero finally commits and says, you know what, there's another world out there and I'm going to progress through it. And it's important to remember that as the hero progresses around the circle in this direction, this line here is not just a trip out of the familiar into the unknown, into the strange, but it also represents a journey into ourselves, right? And that's what happens when we go out into the world. We leave our sheltered, home, and we start to encounter different people with different political views, people of different races and religions, and we start to figure out, oh, as I encounter all these strange things, I need to go deeper into myself and take stock of what I believe, who I am, and how I'm going to interact with those people. And that is really what the Road of Trials is all about. Campbell talks about it as a digestion metaphor, right? That a hero enters into the belly and starts to get broken down. And so you're both building up and breaking down the hero at the same time, which can feel really counterintuitive, but it's really clear. Now here at the bottom of the circle, this would be kind of in our terms of our life, the moment where we're like the strongest and we're the biggest part of our social lives. We're the hero out in our own life and we're at our, peak time. What it really represents in the Campbell cycle is that, okay, you've prepared all you can for the danger you knew about, but the real world is so much bigger than what you knew about. And right here at the bottom, the hero often fails, right? It's that first encounter with a villain and they suddenly realize, I know nothing, right? In Star Wars terms, this is Empire Strikes Back, Luke and Vader, right? Luke is holding his own in that duel, broadly speaking. He's thinking he's prepared, he's been trained by Yoda, and then, boom, I am your father, you don't understand this world, you don't get how it really works. And this is also key, because how many of us in our lives have come across that moment where we set a plan for ourselves, we trained ourselves, we developed ourselves, and then we realize, I don't think that's who I want to be, or I don't think that's what I want to do. And that's a key moment in all of our lives. Now in Campbell, he would also note that that's often the point of our lives, that's marriage, right? So you again think of how almost every culture has some kind of marriage ritual, and we need that understanding of what it means to be in a marriage and to couple and to be in a partnership and all of that. And that really comes at the bottom of the circle. And then up here, I would call this moment retirement, right? This is the moment where our hero, again, from this moment of crisis, I'll just call this one crisis just to fill in the board. We reach this moment up here where they've hit their crisis. They've then learned what they didn't know, right? Luke goes back to Vader, totally different in the second Death Star, because he understands the real world now and how it's supposed to be. And then here is the retirement moment, the return moment where you cross back over the threshold, right? This is entering the world. This is about leaving the world and making sure that at some point you say, okay, I've done all I can for the larger world. I need to get out of that spotlight. And again, think of all our cultures where retirement is a ritual, right? That you spend your time living, working, or being in charge of this, and eventually you need to kind of let that go and return home, return to your zone of comfort. You'll be different, you'll be changed, you'll be four hobbits sitting at a table enjoying your ale and seeing how blissfully ignorant the rest of the hobbits are about about what you've just accomplished. But you need to do that. And that's also a really hard time in our lives. Look no further than world politics right now, right? That we have the aging baby boomer generation, and it's really hard for them to leave power in this moment because they're not ready to give it to the younger generations, right? So, and then as we journey around in this direction, we're moving away from that crisis moment and from the depths of our soul and of our psyche, and we're moving back around to the top of the circle. And that is, again, moving back outward. You broke yourself down to the core of what you believe in. Now you're going to build yourself back up, better, stronger, faster, ready to go. Okay? And then the last one on this side is, of course, death. And those are coupled, because those cultural moments are the same for all of us across cultures, where we really think about how the moment when we're faced with death and we have to give up the world entirely in some form, the thing that comforts us most is birth. To remember, I'm going away, but the next generation continues. I've done my part so that this generation can thrive. And that can be so important, right? And so this is, when we think about Campbell, we should be thinking about how myths deal with those 4 moments and how those 4 moments inform ourselves. Because the reason Campbell works is this pattern, and this is purely straight from Campbell, it's just really long and full of academic jargon. This pattern repeats in us all the time. It's the rhythm of our day, right? You can divide this up with many different parallels, and we'll see that in a moment. But all of these patterns repeat every day, right? You get up every morning. Instead of birth, think of it as waking up. You go through this cycle, and then you return to sleep at the end of the day. Right? Campbell notes that it's also dreams, right? That when we dream, we actually go from the waking world down into our subconscious, try to learn some kind of truth, and come back to the top as a part of it. And so those are the keys to Campbell. Since him, we've had many more kind of refining this, thinking more about it. And it's really important that we remember that that's why it works, is because our culture feels this in our psyche, and it repeats that pattern over and over again. Okay, so I want to talk now, I have a lot of students over time that say, this is great, his text is hard, but I understand some of this stuff. And then I found a really great way to understand this a little bit better, which comes to us from Dan Harmon. If you are a fan of Community or of Rick and Morty, you know Dan Harmon's work. Dan Harmon basically was a student of mythology, understood all this Campbell stuff, and realized that if he's going to be a professional storyteller, he can use it. And so if you can look up beyond this video, you can Google Dan Harmon Story Circles. He has a book that it was published in, but it was kind of a weird, kind of independently published book, so it's hard to get your hands on. But you can find his original blog posts that walk you through all this. But let me give you a little bit of it. So basically, Harmon understood all of this. And as he started to lay it out, he started to think very strongly about this divide, right? This central line, and all the ways in which these 2 halves of the journey represent opposites. And again, as we think about in our own lives, how we kind of feel this rhythm day to day, he notes all the dichotomies you can put on this that work, right? So the first would be the conscious and the unconscious. He also talks about life up here, death down here, wake, sleep, order, chaos, private, public. All of these represent ways in which we feel this pattern because we go through those 2 dichotomies. We switch back and forth between those in our daily lives. So Harmon's adaptation of Campbell is really great because what he does is he numbers this. So he goes right around the circle and hits on each of these moments where the lines cross, and then a number for each of these, 7, 8. And he comes up with the 8 stages of any successful journey. He used this back when he was doing Channel 101. Most episodes of Community follow this. Rick and Morty, by the nature of the show, is a little stranger, but oftentimes you can find these beats in each of his scripts. The other thing he points out is television is a really interesting medium for this because we get this way in which each episode has to be a trip around the story circle, and that seasons and then the length of the show, right? So if you think about the 6 seasons of Community, you could put this on every episode. You could then say season 1, season 2, season 3, and then you could say, starting in the 1, how do we move around in all 6 seasons? How do we place that? I bring that up because it's really helpful to think about Star Wars that way. The pattern of Campbell works because it's your day, it's your month, it's your year, it's your life. And that's how we should apply it to the Star Wars cycle, right? It happens in Force Awakens, but it also happens across the sequel trilogy, and it happens as a part of the 9-movie saga. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the details on Harmon. You can find those. But my favorite part of how he distills this is he takes those 8 stages and he distills it down to a very simple phrase that helps us remember each step of this journey, which can again be helpful when we talk about Star Wars, right? So number 1 is you start your screenplay with a character in a zone of comfort. You give your audience somebody to root for, a hero, a person. Harmon points out that all you need is like the first thing shown in a TV show, and people will say, oh, I'm on the raccoon side, or whatever it is. And so he breaks that down as character in a zone of comfort, And he breaks that down even further as just the word you, right? Because this is, again, when we watch heroes, when we consume myth, we're pulling ourselves into it. You. Number 2 is the character wants something. The character is comfortable, but there's something missing in their life. They're feeling that itch. And so he says that one is need. Number 2 is need. You need, right? There's a character who's in a comfort zone, but they need something. They're unfulfilled. The classic Broadway term of an I want song, right? And then number 3 is, again, that moment of transition, crossing the threshold, moving from the familiar to the unknown, moving from the conscious to the subconscious. And the one word for that is just go, right? They enter an unfamiliar situation. They go. They get out of the commonplace and they go there. Then, number 4, the road of trials. This is where they go try to find that thing. And in doing so, they have to adapt to the unknown. They have to adapt to the new world they've encountered. And so we'll put adapt there. You need go. Once you go, you need to adapt. You need to learn the skills. You need to gather the helpers. You need to get the tools, learn the secret magic spell, all of that. Number 5, Harmon calls it that the character gets exactly what they want, right? That's where they achieve what they wanted for it, right? Luke Skywalker wants to go out and he wants to be a part of a larger story, and he gets it at the heart of Empire. And so we'll call that find. And note that a real parallel here is from number 1 to number 5, right? This is, I was comfortable in my original home world. This is now, I've gotten what I want in the unknown. I'm at the exact opposite part of that story cycle. But as you move into number 6, after the hero gets what they want, they pay a cost for it, right? This is also in Campbell terms called the meeting with the goddess and then the atonement with the father, right? And Empire is the perfect version of that. So number 6, I'll say is cost, right? You need go, search, find, cost, and then return, right? So the cost is whatever the hero had to pay as a part of that. They are being changed by this world. As much as they take from the unconscious, they get back and they try to adapt to that new truth. And that is a hard process, right? That involves loss, that involves death, that involves having to take a new version of yourself, which is really difficult. More on that in a minute. Return, you cross back over the threshold. And number 8, Harmon just calls change, right? Because the whole point of a story is to help us through our growth and help us through our changing times in our lives. And so we have to see the character change. And by seeing the character change, we learn about ourselves. We learn how we're going to apply that to a future situation. And so, you know, I mentioned it before, but Campbell kind of says this is all myth. Harmon takes it and he says, this is all of our modern art and our modern storytelling. If you read his full blog entry, basically he takes all his favorite movies and walks around the circle, and it absolutely works for just about all of them. Now, I would add the kind of merger of those 2 points. That means that not only is this kind of deeply culturally embedded in us, but think of how much television we consume. Think of how many movies we consume. So that rhythm is further implanting on us. And so if it's the fact that it's just one story was always true, now it is more and more true because that's what we respond to. We've adapted to the story structure, and so we build and we develop as a part of that. Now, this is already getting very long, so I just want to, apply some of this. I think if you're trying to talk about Campbell, the Harmon corollary on it is really helpful, and again, seek out his full source. So this made me think a lot about Rey. Because we've just experienced the end of her journey and we're thinking a lot about this. Just like I said about television, we can again think about Rey's journey in each movie and across her trilogy or as a part of the larger saga. I just want to talk a little bit about her journey through the sequel trilogy. Now, this is me moving away from scholarship into my personal interpretation that will open me up to some wonderful comments, I'm sure, and you are absolutely right to disagree or to say my interpretation isn't right in some certain ways. I just tried to hash this out to give you a concrete example of how you might apply this, and hopefully it's helpful. Okay, so thinking through Rey through these stages, I would say, starting here, I would say we really move to this point, I would call that TFA. Okay? And again, you could view TFA as a whole trip around the circle, but I'm going to interpret it as this moment. And it starts for Rey's hero journey when we meet her on Jakku, and we see her in her scavenger life. The absolute best part of Force Awakens for me is that, 5 minutes from when we see her in the Star Destroyer, we see her scrubbing the parts, and we understand this life she has. It's efficient, really effective storytelling, and we understand both that she's a character who has adjusted to this life, right? Think of all the hash marks. Think of all the bread, right? She knows how to do this. She's surviving. She understands a degree of comfort in her AT-AT home that understands it. But what better way to think about that is character in a zone of comfort, and then the need, right? What do we know about Rey? She needs connection. She's desperately lonely, right? She has the contact with Unkar Platt. We see her being kind of mistreated along those, and we understand that the real need here is some kind of connection, right? Now, over the course of Force Awakens, that becomes connection to other people, or perhaps connection to her family, because the family keeps coming up. She'll go and do these different actions, but she says, I gotta get back. I gotta wait for my family. They're coming for me, and we understand that. This is very different and kind of beautifully, inverted from Luke Skywalker's journey. Luke Skywalker's home life isn't the most comfortable, but he doesn't need that connection. He, in fact, gets too much connection. What he wants is to leave that life behind. Rey has become the mirror image of that, where she doesn't have that connection, she doesn't have that life, and she needs to push forward as a part of that. Now, as a part of that first quadrant, as a lot of people know, you get the call to adventure, which, Rey, that Campbell defines that as when the mysterious enters into the commonplace. That's BB-8 and Tito, right? Starts Rey on this path where we start to see her increase her, part in this story. Think of all the times she's invited on the adventure and she declines, right? She fixes BB-8, he wants to go with her, she says no, then she says yes, right? Finn needs her help, she says no, and then she says yes. And we see then later that Han offers her the chance to join his crew, and she says no, right? So all of these stages represent kind of her in this opening part. We can't yet get over our common day. The trivial and the common feels like too much. So you could debate this a lot, but if I'm looking at Rey for this real moment where she's called to adventure, for me it has to be in the basement of Maz's castle. She touches the Skywalker lightsaber. She sees suddenly what this wider world is, that there's a whole world of the Force that she hasn't encountered yet. And Maz is willing to help her encounter that, but she's not quite sure that's what she wants, and she refuses it, right? She runs into the forest, but like in so many good stories, the adventure keeps going and she has to get it. So thinking of that Rey's crossover moment, I would put at the kind of last stage of Force Awakens, where she has now accepted that she wants to be part of that larger world. And for me, the moment is when Kylo's reaching out for the lightsaber, you get the swell of music, it flies past him right into Rey's hand. She's crossed over. She's decided finally, you know what, I'm going to leave that old life behind. I'm a part of this now. And all the things that have prepared her for that, Finn going to Starkiller Base to pick her up, Han and Chewie's love for her, we've seen that develop over time, and we've seen her encounter the darkness that is Kylo Ren. And this kind of switchover is like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be the hero. I'm not going to set this aside. I'm not going to go back to Jakku. I understand the cost, and this is what I'm going to do. Okay? Now, I put TFA a little over that because I would say her then trip to go see Luke is her kind of fully aware that now I'm on a quest, now I'm going to start my journey as a part of this, and I'm going to continue on from that moment. And I think that's all really good. I could go on and on and on and on. But I would say, and we get the destruction of Starkiller here as a part of that as well. But I think you've gotten my point, or at least as much as necessary, as a part of this. So I would then say, I'm going to fill in this circle more, I would say that The Last Jedi takes us around this far. Again, totally debatable. But TLJ, which is my personal favorite of the sequel trilogy, I think Ryan, when he talked about his plans for it, what he said first is, I wanted to take each character and confront them with the worst thing they could possibly face and see what they did. What better explanation for the road of trials, right? Rey has her quest. She's going to go become a Jedi. She has to learn about this new world, and she's going to take her time to do that. And that's going to mean again, both a journey into that world and a breaking down of yourself and who you are. And what better way to encapsulate all Rey's time on Octo, but it's that breaking down, that's trying to understand who she is, what the Force is, who Luke is, what Luke means to all of it, and I think that's a great part of that. So taking Harmon's term, search and adapt, right? She's searching for the way to be the Jedi. And so if we're thinking about it that way, she's searching for connection as well, right? That's the piece of her that was missing, some kind of connection, some kind of family. And she starts to figure out that she's getting that connection. And that connection comes to her from Kylo, the most unexpected of places, right? I feel it too, right? And on into this world where she starts to delve into that. I would say that the pairing of Luke training her on Octo with Kylo and her exploring that connection shows that dichotomy of trying to go out into the world and get the skills and also going into yourself, right? An exterior-interior dichotomy. So if I then cross over then to this moment of crisis, being fully back in the world, I would put this bottom piece at her arrival on the Supremacy, right? She leaves Luke behind. She thinks she's gathered enough tools. She wants to go be the full hero. She wants to do her part of this story. And here at the bottom of the circle, I would put her confrontation with Snoke, her teaming up with Kyle, everything that happens at that kind of climactic throne room battle scene. At that moment, she is a part of this story, and she's connected. She's connected to Kylo, and she knows she has a big part of that. Like, Harmon said, it's fine. She got everything she wanted. What she didn't know is that getting what you want sucks, right? And so when we move through from the throne room on into the end of The Last Jedi, it's all about paying that cost, right? And the first cost she pays is she understands that the connection between her and Kylo wasn't enough for him, right? Let the past die, kill it if you have to. He puts his hand out and she realizes he hasn't changed. They're going to burn down it all if she teams up with him. And so she knows she needs to break that. The connection she craved, she can't have as a part of that. Then through the end of that movie, you get the crate battle, you get Luke. She has now saved Luke from his exile, and she gets what she wants in that way too. Luke Skywalker returns to the battle. But in the closing moments of Last Jedi, she senses Luke has died, right? That's her cost, right? She made it into the big world, but she's going to lose, and she's actually going to keep losing for a while into Rise of Skywalker. One other thing I would say about Rey is if you want to get more specific about the connections, it's also about her heroes. She wanted a hero, right? Luke Skywalker, I thought he was a myth. She believed in heroes. And guess what she learned down here at the crisis at the bottom of the circle? Heroes fail. They're not who we need. They're not invincible. That's my favorite part of Last Jedi. I understand people who say that's not their Luke Skywalker. But in this modern world, we have to remember heroes can only do so much. We have to take over, and that's why it's a modern myth. Okay, to continue on, I went halfway in this circle because, like I said, I think a lot of Rise of Skywalker is Rey continuing to lose, right? To pay that cost, to be a part of that. Here in this apotheosis stage, when she realizes the full world, when she realizes herself, I think there's a moment where truly it's the Palpatine moment. When she realizes not only do you have that connection, but it's the worst connection you thought to this story. Right? It's the worst type. You are not just a part of this story. You're on the dark side. You're a part of that evil family. I have some parts of that I don't like. I have some parts of that are starting to work for me. But I'll just note it there as an extremely high cost, right? Oh, you want to be part of this story more than anything else? Guess what? You're on the wrong team. And she has to face that, and she has to think about that. So from that moment on, I would say, obviously, Rise of Skywalker takes us the rest of the way around this chunk. I would go this far to say that takes us through, really the first hour and a half of the Rise of Skywalker. She's dealing with the new truth, dealing with the new world, and dealing with a little more of that cost, right? When she uses the lightning on the transport, she realized there's some darkness inside her, and she's going to have to deal with that. So this moment here, I might place at, when she decides to go to Exegol, right? Really hard to determine. You can debate me on this, clearly. But when we get to that moment, it's her. She's been tempted away. She thought she should follow Luke, but she realized, no, if I'm going to be a part of that story, I have to return to the story and I have to be central in it. So I would put that moment as a return. Now, it's not a return to Jakku. That's fine. That's not exactly what we needed her to do. We need her to try to overcome this great evil. Campbell has this idea that, the hero fails down here and then it conquers the hero here, but some part of the hero's influence continues on. One reading of that is Rey thought she had to beat Snoke, but it's really Palpatine, right? Palpatine's the part of the evil that follows on. And so this return is, I'm going to go face down that, and I'm going to actualize there. Okay? So she embraces her public role. She understands, if I'm going to continue to be who I want to be, I have to also deal with that. If we think of it as private-public, she's going back into her private life with that full knowledge of who she is in public as a part of that. 7 is return, 8 is change. And what do we see across that third act of Rise of Skywalker, except that Rey has changed? She's different. She's not the same scavenger we once knew. She's harder, she's smarter, she's better trained, and she's stronger, right? Now, the other cool moment I would add into this kind of piece of change is we get this hint from J.J. Abrams that somewhere down here, she starts trying to communicate with the dead Jedi. And some of the novels have filled in Luke, other voices. She wants to connect with them. She's still craving connection. That's all she ever wanted. Now she's got this circle of friends. She's maybe having trouble connecting with Poe. Finn and her seem pretty tight. Leia and her are very close. But she still feels like she lacks that complete connection. Well, what we have in this last moment is the voices of the Jedi telling her, no, you've changed. You've grown. You are one of us. You belong here. You're a part of that story. And so we find that the thing she went looking for and the thing she thought she found actually is the thing that powers her at the end. And she can overcome evil because she has all the Jedi in her then. And she can stand up and she can face that down. And then this last piece, of course, to just delve fully into the controversial parts of Rise of Skywalker, for me is the trip to the homestead, right? Because at that moment, that's the end of the plot line where she's returned to the Resistance. She knows who she is. She knows who she wants to be, and she's seen the heroes for who they really are. And after that, she's realized she's going to be the hero now. And so she's closing off their story by burying their lightsabers. And she's then starting at this moment to tell her own story, right? And we get the beautiful sunrise to tell us that's coming. And we also get the Rey Skywalker moment. And now, please don't think I need to convince you that that's, the perfect ending or that it makes perfect sense. But what I would say about the Rey Skywalker moment and the home scene moment in general is this is where we finally see her as master of both worlds, right? She has become a fully realized person. She has gotten through all of these stages and now has transitioned to a fully aware, fully realized person who can make all these choices on her own. Now, one of my favorite novels of all time is Moby Dick. And if you know Moby Dick, the first line of the actual novel is "Call me Ishmael." And a popular interpretation of that novel is that the whole novel is actually about Ishmael trying to find out who he is. When we meet him, he doesn't really get it. He goes on this horrific voyage. He almost dies, and he's reborn at the very end, floating in a coffin after his ship sinks. Spoilers on Moby Dick, I guess. And so if you know that about the book, you understand his full journey. When you then reread it and get back to that beginning, "Call me Ishmael" isn't just like a casual, like, hey, call me Ishmael. It's, call me Ishmael. This is who I am. This is who I am. So when I look at the Rey Skywalker moment, that's what I see. This is her call me Ishmael. I'm Rey Skywalker, right? That's who I choose to be. That's who I want you to know me as. I don't know why everybody in the Star Wars galaxy suddenly got concerned with last names, but that's her answer to that question now, because she's changed and she's different and she feels that for her. Now, it's my hope that we start the cycle again, right? It's the end of one age. We can go on to another. Who knows if Disney will stick to that or not. Great. So I've certainly talked long enough. I hope that was fun and helpful. I'm sure it was dry and boring, but I'd love to hear back your thoughts and if this helped you or if you're thinking about it. Shoot me questions on Twitter, and I'd be happy to give some of my sources or some of my recommendations or things like that. So once again, happy Star Wars Day. I hope you all enjoy this crazy fandom that we all love, and I hope that this video has, in some small way, paid you back for all the many hours of great time you've given me. Thank you.